If you feel like you're just shooting the breeze in therapy, you might be wasting your time and your money. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Shara and I'm a mental health counselor. I've been working with individuals for over 15 years and I absolutely love what I do. But you know what? I don't like to be bored in therapy. Whether I'm the client or the therapist, I don't like to just sit and talk about whatever. So one way that I, as a therapist, know that there's progress being made is if I'm not bored. Now, I'm not the client, so we're going to talk about the client in just a minute and how clients know that therapy is working. But for me as a therapist, I know that we're making progress when I feel that there's a sense of mutual engagement. There's a sense of energy in the room. I can see from week to week that that client is shifting and that there are changes happening and that they come in energized, that we have plenty of things to say, and that, as said before, that I'm not bored. And if I start getting bored, I find that as a cue that we are getting off track. Something's wrong. So I'll even say that to the client and say, are you feeling what I'm feeling? It feels like maybe we're done, or maybe we're reaching the end of therapy. I will say that if I'm feeling bored by what's happening. And almost invariably, there very rarely is an exception where the client will then say, you know what, yeah, I'm feeling it too. And then we'll talk about it and say, do you really need to be here? And then we'll have one of two things happen. Either they will start being more honest and they'll say, actually, I think I've been avoiding some topics. And then therapy gets exciting again. Or they realize, you know what? I think I'm doing okay. And I'll say, that's wonderful. And I'll be very clear with my clients that if I'm feeling bored and they're feeling bored, that means the work is done. Or that maybe this isn't the right place for them to be. Maybe there is another therapist that they would connect with better. I try to make it very clear to therapists, and I think this is general, I think this should go for pretty much anyone in therapy, that even if they have good insurance coverage, even if they're not having to pay a lot of money, they're still having to turn that key in the ignition and get over to the office. Or at the very least, carve out that hour for that virtual session and attend one-on-one and spend that time. Time is very valuable. And if you don't get something out of being in therapy, you should not be there. So I try to just have conversations that if they have a sense of boredom, or if I have a sense of boredom, we need to talk about what's up. Are we done? Or do we need to shift gears? All right, the secret ingredient obviously is goals in therapy and tracking those goals. And I have two things to say about that, how it is the secret ingredient and it also isn't at the same time. So let's first talk about how it is the secret ingredient. Goals are necessary. How can we go anywhere in therapy without a goal? For instance, I'm working with a mother and daughter, and the goal for this mother and daughter is more harmony at home. This is the goal. So everything that we do as we talk is geared around how are the interactions at home looking like. Now, I may want to hear about some other things like family vacation, grades, or health to help me understand aspects of this child and the mother that may be useful. But in essence, the conversations always come back to how is the harmony at home looking? That is the conversation that we're talking about. I once had a therapist probably 15 years ago, and I noticed that it would be about 20 or 30 minutes into the session every time before we'd actually start talking about my goals. He would comment on my handbag. He'd talk about sports. He would shoot the breeze about current events. It was very frustrating. I think in his mind, he felt like he was building rapport, but what he was doing was wasting my time. And I was a cash patient and I was very frustrated. I also didn't have the assertiveness skills to say, hey, can we talk about my goals now? But even at my age now and being a therapist, I probably wouldn't say that to my therapist. I would quit therapy and go find another therapist. Because if you have to tell them, hey, can we focus on my goals? It feels like a red flag to me anyway. But all right, back to that. You want goals. If you know what the goal is, then you make sure your conversations are geared around that. And as the client, if you feel like you do need to prompt the therapist that I would like to be a little more goal focused, there's nothing wrong with that. There's everything right with that. Therapists don't read minds. They need your feedback. It's just if it's super extreme and you feel like you actually have to teach them how to do their job, then that's time to find a new therapist. But in most cases, you can just say, you know what, I really like, I like building rapport, but I really, really, really want to spend the time as most productively as possible. Can we get right into it? Most of the time that the therapist is going to be like, oh yeah, that's good to know. And if they don't take the feedback, that's a red flag. The other part where I said, yeah, sometimes it isn't about the goals though, is that there's a toggling back and forth in therapy between focusing on the goal and then being open to reassess, are we even looking at the right goal anyway? And so kind of having that open visual field to talk a little bit about other topics can help you assess, help the therapist assess and help you as a client assess, is there something else maybe it's more important to be talking about? Let's use, for example, a teenager whose parent has brought them in because they're not doing well in school. So if we're talking about grades in school, we're going to talk about, are they getting enough support with homework? And, maybe what is stressing them out that's causing it difficult for them? Do they have ADHD? Different things like that all around the grades. But if I pick up on something else, that maybe they're really missing grandma and they're in some grief around that, then we might be not talking directly about grades, right? But we really are working on grades because they're distracted by this grief. So it's like, yes, you work on the goals, but you have kind of an open visual field, knowing that everything affects everything. This grief about grandma can affect the grades. And so as focused as you are on goals, you're also aware other things are affecting those goals. All right, how do you really know if you're making progress? You want to see some changes. You want to see from week to week that you're getting some different perspectives and that you're seeing some growth. Now, this is part 2 of 6, a whole series in how to get the most out of therapy. So there's so much more to cover. I hope you watch the whole playlist. It will be in my description along with a free download for an entire guide on how to make sure you're getting the most out of therapy. So be sure to check out those links, and I'll see you in the next episode.